Namaste everybody, welcome to the beach. So this week's Beach's Corner, as we do call it, is going to be a little bit different in the aspect that I'm going to give some more input, again, why I practice yoga, but also introduce a new section that we're going to be doing along with giving some scientific background because this is science-based yoga. So when we talk about yoga, there's various different practices. There's yin yang, whatever yoga. There's vinyasa. There's hatha. There's all kinds of yoga that we can do. So the kind that I personally practice on a regular basis is called vinyasa. And what that, you've heard me say, it kind of means breath, but what the true meaning of vinyasa is movement to breath. So in Sanskrit, which is what yoga is written in, whatever, it's prana is breath and it's life force. And although that is a very yogi way of putting it, I like that concept because people underestimate the power of breath and what it can do for us. Obviously, we are human beings who breathe oxygen. We are animals who breathe oxygen, the whole shebang. But it gives it a specific meaning when we talk about life force. And it is very overlooked, not just in the regular world of people functioning, but in the athletic world or the competitive world or the active world. The breath is highly underutilized as a training mechanism. So part of the reason that I enjoy yoga so much is, in particularly vinyasa yoga, is the idea of connecting movement to our breath. So when we actually look at and break down the research of breath, there are there's lots of different names for it. The one that is kind of specifically to yoga, but most activity, is called diaphragmatic breathing. I know it seems very simple, but people sometimes forget this. We use the diaphragm. That's this structure. It's at the base of our rib cage. Most of us did the science experiment in school. We put the balloon on the bottle, on top and bottom, we pull, and the balloon moves, and that was to replicate the diaphragm. It's very true. When we think of the core, a lot of the times the diaphragm is left out of it when it is the top of our core. It is what makes this here part of our core. And then it goes all the way down to the pelvic floor. So we have a cylinder and it goes all the way across. The diaphragm is the roof. The pelvic floor is called the pelvic floor. And then we have all of these muscles in between. We have the psoas, the rectus abdominis, all these other muscles. You know, I could bore you with an anatomy lesson. I'm not going to. But when we think of diaphragmatic breathing, we are utilizing the diaphragm. It's the proper way to breathe, but most people don't realize that they don't breathe properly. We have a lot of muscles up here that are accessory muscles to breath, and their main function is to help breathing, particularly when the rest of our core gets very tired. So if we do a lot of running, a lot of people start noticing chest tightness up here. It's because these muscles are starting to function in that realm. So whenever I work with athletes, patients, clients, and I say, take a deep breath, normally the first thing is this. That's good, but we're underutilizing this aspect right here. So again, taking it back to research, there is a ton of research that has started to look at diaphragmatic breathing and its proper use in multiple things. When we look at it from a musculoskeletal concept, it is the best core building exercise that anybody can do. Just learning to breathe with your cylinder. Some call it three-dimensional breathing. Basically, the idea is that we're breathing with this whole thing right here. And it starts with diaphragmatic breathing. What that is when you take a breath, if you notice my stomach moves, so take a big breath in and out. Now my chest still moves, but you see this whole thing moving. That's diaphragmatic breathing. So the other concept, so for musculoskeletal, it affects what we call the multifidi, however you want to say it. It affects the psoas, it affects the transverse abdominis, the obliques, all of these muscles that people use for basic activities of daily living or for athletic activity. If you are not utilizing diaphragmatic breathing in your training regimen, in your rehabilitation regimen, research is showing you're actually cutting off a vast percentage of your core strengthening. And I forgot that there's a paper that looks at it, the exact number, but it is, I mean, it's substantial amount of core strengthening that you're leaving out. Now we take away from, like, we're just ignoring the musculoskeletal. Maybe you're like, I'm not an athlete, I just want to like function. Diaphragmatic breathing has been shown to increase cognitive function, decrease anxiety, decrease stress markers, all of the things, because we are just adding more oxygen to our daily activities. So now that we've gotten kind of that little slight umbrella of what diaphragmatic breathing kind of is, this is yoga. How does it bring it back? Well, yoga, particularly vinyasa flow, really connects that diaphragmatic breathing to movement. And there are some specific postures where you can feel it. My favorite one to really get people to feel the difference of diaphragmatic breathing versus just normal breathing is cat-cow. So when you say drop your stomach, lift your chest, I'll tell people take a big breath through your stomach, and you can feel the tension. If you're not used to breathing that way, you feel this it's like a tight myofascial tightness all the way from the chest to the stomach. And that's the best way. And then you tell them to exhale and round the spine. And basically what that does is it really, like biofeedback, you can feel the expansion of that stomach because you're already putting it on stretch. Then you're adding that added benefit of diaphragmatic breathing. That's one of my favorite postures that really shows you the movement with breath function. But anytime that another one is going from like a chaturanga, so you exhale. When you go up into up dog, you inhale, it expands that stomach, and then you exhale back into down dog. So a lot of the flows that you'll hear of Namaste Beaches, you'll hear inhale, this function, exhale, this function. And so it's connecting that breath to movement. That's one of the reasons that I like yoga so much, is that it can train you to use that breath to your advantage. And then once you kind of get somebody to understand that, so let's say it is so for example, I worked with an athlete who had a pars interarticularis fracture. That's a fracture of the spine. This athlete was never able to do a rollout, barbell rollout, any type of rollout. We could not do a ton of movement with him while the fracture was in place. We started with diaphragmatic breathing. No movement, nothing but focusing on inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Moving the legs, no pain in the low back. Once we started with that, we did that for the time that he wasn't allowed to move through this injury. We then started to connect that to yoga movements, then to weighted movements, then to weightlifting. By the time we were done with just an 8-week course of diaphragmatic breathing, yoga, all the way to the top, he was able to do a barbell rollout. But we connect that mind to that movement, and I have seen it work wonders. So now that I'm on my pedestal of diaphragmatic breathing in yoga, what does that mean? So it's a little bit too much to fully explain the idea of it and show the movement in just one Beach's Corner. So what we're going to do is a short class on the line on the YouTube of diaphragmatic breathing from the baseline to high caliber movements, and showing you what it looks like. So we're gonna put on some YouTube videos so you can really see what diaphragmatic breathing is. Another concept of it that I really like that is really more for one set population is how diaphragmatic breathing and strengthening, the wonders that it can do for prenatal and postpartum women. The pelvic floor is the base of the cylinder. So if we can strengthen and create proper function. There's a research paper, it's very interesting, that shows that diastasis recti, which is the splitting of the core muscles that happens during pregnancy, it was really thought that that was a show of dysfunction. They did the study, and although all of the women had diastasis recti, not all of them had pelvic floor or abdominal dysfunction, and not all of them had pain. What they found was the dysfunction and pain all related to the strength of the pelvic floor, nothing to do with whether there was a diastasis recti there or not. So what that says is that looks don't indicate function and vice versa. So what diaphragmatic breathing can do for this very specialized population is get you back to function. It teaches us to breathe properly, and by breathing properly, you are automatically connecting the pelvic floor to your entire body because it is a function of just breathing. It's a little bit more complicated, and that's why we're going to do, an extra classes on YouTube to really hone this in as far as what it means. And if it's a true pelvic floor dysfunction, you want to go see a pelvic floor therapist because they can specialize in things like this. But if you're, pregnant or postpartum and you just want to add something to your program, highly recommend very gentle movements of diaphragmatic breathing. Before baby and after baby, this is all that I did when I couldn't do anything else because, you just had a kid or you're preparing to have a kid. It's really hard to do some specific movements, and weightlifting is just out of the question, particularly postpartum, for that first time because you can damage the pelvic floor if you're not careful. So just starting, so there's no movement involved as far as like hardcore dynamic movements when it comes to just the very basis of diaphragmatic breathing. It made a world of difference in my recovery postpartum. So a lot of information there, a lot of different things, but the biggest thing is diaphragmatic breathing is the life force, prana, of all of us. And the reason I love yoga is it connects vinyasa particularly connects breath to movement and can make you a much more functional human being. And you don't have to just do yoga. You can do your yoga and then go and do weightlifting. Valsalva, which is like breathing in and then holding it and going through your weights, is still, if you aren't properly filling your abdomen by properly diaphragmatic breathing, you're still not doing your cylinder justice. And so this concept of breathing has been very much overlooked by the health world and the activity world, the competitive world. And so I like to bring it all back to diaphragmatic breathing, and it is a huge part of my rehabilitative process for most injuries, and it's part of my everyday practice for when I'm competing, whatever I'm doing. So we will start some classes on some diaphragmatic breathing, just a few short ones. They're not very difficult or very long, but we're really going to be bringing it back to breath. And I think a lot of you will start to notice that you might have six-pack abs after this. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this Beach's Corner. It was a little bit different. We threw some science, threw some other stuff into it, and hopefully you join us for some of these diaphragmatic breathing classes. We hope to see you guys on the mat. And remember, namaste, beaches.